October 18th, 2026, Beijing. Tourists walk through the ruins of Yuanmingyuan, the old summer palace. Shattered marble columns rise from overgrown grass. Burned pavilions stand like skeletons against the sky. Empty halls where emperors once ruled China now echo with silence. A large sign reads in Chinese and English, "Never forget national humiliation." Chinese schoolchildren on field trips stop to take photos. Their teachers explain how foreign armies destroyed this place 166 years ago, how they looted over 1 million artifacts, how they burned it all to the ground in 3 days. This isn't ancient history preserved in amber. This is a wound kept deliberately open. The Chinese government maintains these ruins exactly as they were left in 1860. No restoration, no reconstruction. Just rubble and memory. Because forgetting would be worse than the destruction itself. How did the most magnificent palace complex in Asia become a pile of ruins? How did Britain, a tiny island nation, nearly destroy the world's oldest continuous civilization? And why, 166 years later, does China still refuse to forget? The answer starts with a drug. Opium. Between 1797 and 1838, British opium imports to China increased by 1,000%, from 4,000 chests per year to 40,000. Each chest contained 140 pounds of raw opium, enough to supply thousands of addicts. By the late 1800s, 10% of China's population was hooked. 13.5 million addicts by 1906. 27% of all adult males. The largest drug epidemic in world history. Britain didn't stumble into this crisis. They engineered it deliberately. Opium solved Britain's trade problem with China. The British wanted Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. But China didn't want anything Britain made. So Britain paid in silver. British silver reserves were draining fast. Then someone had an idea. Grow opium in India. Smuggle it into China. Demand payment in silver. Use that silver to buy tea. Ship the tea back to Britain. Profit. It worked brilliantly. For Britain. For China, it was catastrophic. This is the story of how one empire poisoned another for profit. How China tried to stop it and got invaded for their trouble. How British soldiers looted the greatest palace in Asia and burned it to send a message. And how that humiliation still shapes Chinese politics today. This is the story of the Opium Wars. 1780. China under the Qing dynasty was the richest civilization on earth. They had tea that Europe was obsessed with. They had silk that couldn't be produced anywhere else. They had porcelain so fine it seemed magical. Europe wanted it all desperately, but China didn't want anything Europe had. British wool? China made their own. British manufactured goods? China wasn't interested. The only thing China would accept was silver. So silver flowed from Britain to China in massive quantities. The average London worker spent 5% of their entire household budget on tea. From 1821 to 1830, the British East India Company spent over £19 million on Chinese goods. 90% of that was tea. Britain's silver reserves were being drained. Something had to change. The British East India Company controlled Bengal, India. Bengal had perfect conditions for growing opium poppies. And opium, the company discovered, sold extremely well in China. Opium had been used in China for centuries as medicine. Small doses for pain relief. But smoking opium recreationally was new. And it was powerfully addictive. The company couldn't sell opium directly because China had banned it. So they used a clever system. The East India Company grew opium in India. They sold it to private country traders who weren't officially connected to the company. These traders smuggled the opium into China and sold it to Chinese smugglers. The Chinese smugglers distributed it inland. The silver flowed backward. From Chinese addicts to Chinese dealers. From Chinese dealers to British smugglers. From British smugglers to British merchants. From British merchants to the East India Company. And finally, the company used that silver to buy tea. The triangle was complete. Britain to India with manufactured goods. India to China with opium. China to Britain with tea and silk. Everyone made money except the Chinese people dying of addiction. The numbers exploded. In 1797, the British sold 4,000 chests of opium per year to China. That's 308 tons. By 1820, it was 10,000 chests annually. By 1838, 40,000 chests. Over 5,600 tons of opium flooding into China every single year. The price dropped as supply increased. In 1822, one chest of opium cost 2,500 Spanish silver dollars. By 1838, just $585. Opium became cheap enough that ordinary workers could afford it. The addiction crisis spread from coastal elites to inland farmers. China's silver started flowing out faster than it came in. The economy destabilized. Qing officials watched helplessly as their people became addicts and their treasury emptied. 1838. The Daoguang Emperor had seen enough. He appointed Lin Zexu, one of his most capable officials, as Special Imperial Commissioner with one mission: end the opium trade forever. Lin was a Confucian scholar, known for his integrity and determination. He believed China's survival depended on stopping the poison. Lin arrived in Canton in March 1839. He moved fast. He arrested over 1,600 Chinese opium dealers. He seized 50,000 pounds of opium and destroyed it publicly. He posted notices warning foreigners that the death penalty now applied to opium trafficking. Then Lin did something remarkable. He wrote an open letter to Queen Victoria. The letter was extraordinary. Lin appealed to Victoria's morality. He pointed out that Britain banned opium in their own country because they knew it was harmful. So how could British merchants justify selling it to China? Quote, "Your Majesty has not been officially notified before, and you may plead ignorance of the severity of our laws, but I now give my assurance that we mean to cut this harmful drug forever." Unquote. He asked a simple question. How would you like it if we poisoned your people? The letter was powerful, logical, and compassionate. It never reached the Queen. Some sources say it was lost in transit. Others suggest it was deliberately ignored. Lin then blockaded the foreign quarter of Canton. He told British merchants they couldn't leave until they surrendered all their opium. No food, no water, just waiting. British Superintendent Charles Elliot convinced the merchants to comply. The British handed over everything: 20,283 chests, over 1,400 tons of opium, 3 million pounds of the drug, the largest drug seizure in history. Lin took it all to Humen Beach on June 3, 1839. He mixed the opium with salt and lime to destroy it chemically. Then he flushed it into the ocean. The process took 23 days. He did it publicly, so everyone could see China's determination to end the trade. The British merchants expected compensation from the Chinese government for their seized property. The Chinese refused. The opium was illegal contraband. Why would they pay for destroying poison? The British government made a different calculation. Charles Elliot had promised the merchants that Britain would compensate them for their losses. That promise, and the inability to pay it without political backlash, became Britain's justification for war. September 4th, 1839. British and Chinese warships clashed in the Kowloon estuary. The British destroyed 29 Chinese vessels in the first engagement. It set the tone for the entire war. British naval technology was decades ahead. They had steam-powered warships like the Nemesis. They had long-range cannons. They had rifles that could reload quickly. The Chinese had wooden junks. They had outdated cannons with terrible accuracy. They had matchlock muskets that took forever to reload. On water, it wasn't even close. June 1840. A full British expeditionary force arrived off Macau. 30 warships, 4,000 troops. They sailed north and bombarded the port of Dinghai. The Chinese defenses collapsed. The British strategy was surgical. Don't attack everywhere. Target key ports and trade routes. Cut off the Grand Canal that supplied Beijing with grain. Threaten the capital. Force the emperor to negotiate. It worked. The British moved up the coast, capturing port after port. Xiamen fell in August 1841. Ningbo fell in October. The Chinese counterattacked in March 1842 and were easily defeated. British casualties at Zhenhai: 3 dead, 16 wounded. Chinese casualties: thousands. By August 1842, British ships reached Nanjing, the old capital. They prepared to bombard the city. The Qing dynasty surrendered. August 29th, 1842. The Treaty of Nanking was signed aboard the British warship HMS Cornwallis. China was forced to pay 21 million Spanish silver dollars in war reparations, 6 million immediately, the rest in installments. The money was for destroyed opium and war expenses. China had to pay Britain for destroying the poison Britain smuggled in. China had to open 5 treaty ports to British trade: Shanghai, Canton, Ningbo, Fuzhou, and Xiamen. British merchants could now live and trade in these cities with minimal Chinese oversight. China had to cede Hong Kong Island to Britain. Forever. A barren rock that would become one of the world's great cities under British control for 156 years. The treaty gave Britain most favored nation status. Any privilege China granted to another country automatically applied to Britain too, and British subjects in China got extraterritoriality. If a British citizen committed a crime in China, they'd be tried under British law by British courts. Chinese law didn't apply. The treaty was brilliant from Britain's perspective, humiliating from China's. And it didn't even mention opium. The opium trade remained technically illegal under Chinese law, but with 5 open ports and extraterritoriality, enforcement became impossible. The first Opium War cost Britain 520 casualties, 69 killed in action. China lost between 18,000 and 20,000 soldiers killed or wounded. China called it the first of the unequal treaties. Britain called it the opening of China to free trade. Both were right. 14 years passed. The opium trade continued booming. British merchants wanted more. October 1856. Chinese authorities in Canton boarded a cargo ship called the Arrow. The ship was Chinese-owned, but registered in Hong Kong under the British flag. Chinese Marines arrested 12 crew members for suspected piracy. British Consul Harry Parkes claimed the Chinese had insulted the British flag by pulling it down during the arrest. He demanded immediate release of the crew and an apology. The Chinese Viceroy, Yuanmingyuan, released most of the sailors, but refused to apologize. That was all Britain needed. The French joined in after a French missionary was executed in Guangxi province. The Second Opium War began. This time, Britain had clearer goals. Legalize the opium trade completely. Open all of China to foreign trade. Establish permanent diplomatic missions in Beijing. Extract maximum concessions. December 1857. A combined British and French force attacked Canton. They bombarded the city for 3 weeks. Then they stormed it. They captured Viceroy Ye and sent him to exile in Calcutta, where he later died. They installed a puppet government and moved north. May 1858. British and French forces captured the Taku forts guarding the approach to Tianjin and Beijing. The Qing Emperor Xianfeng panicked. He agreed to negotiate. The Treaty of Tianjin was signed in June 1858. 10 more treaty ports opened. Foreign diplomats could establish embassies in Beijing. Foreigners could travel freely in China's interior. Christian missionaries got protection to evangelize anywhere. And opium. Opium was now completely legal. Importation, sale, consumption, all legal. The drug that started everything was now officially sanctioned. But the treaty wasn't enough to end the war. When British and French envoys tried to sail to Beijing to exchange ratification documents in June 1859, Chinese forces at the Taku forts opened fire. The British were repelled. The war resumed. Summer 1860. An even larger Anglo-French army landed near Tianjin. This time they brought overwhelming force. They stormed the Taku forts. They marched inland toward Beijing. The Xianfeng Emperor, realizing Beijing would fall, fled north to the Chengde Summer Palace and then to Manchuria. He left his brother Prince Gong in charge of surrender negotiations. September 1860. As British and French troops approached Beijing, Harry Parkes and a delegation of negotiators rode out under a flag of truce to arrange terms. The Chinese seized them. They tortured some. They executed 19. When Lord Elgin, the British High Commissioner, learned his diplomats had been captured and tortured, he was furious. He wanted revenge, not just military victory. Symbolic humiliation. He chose the perfect target. The Yuanmingyuan, the old summer palace. October 6th, 1860. French troops reached the old summer palace first. What they found stunned them. Yuanmingyuan wasn't just a palace. It was a sprawling complex covering 3.5 square kilometers, 860 acres. It had gardens designed by Jesuit priests, European-style buildings, Chinese pavilions, lakes, temples, libraries, and treasures. Rooms filled with jade carvings, gold artifacts, silk tapestries, ancient scrolls, porcelain so valuable each piece could buy a house. The accumulated wealth of China's emperors over centuries, all unguarded. The looting began immediately. French General Charles Cousin Montauban and British General Hope Grant appointed commissioners to catalogue the most valuable items for official distribution. Lord Elgin chose a jade scepter that belonged to the emperor. French Empress Eugénie got elaborate gifts. Military officers took what they wanted. But that was just the official looting. British and French soldiers ransacked everything. They smashed what they couldn't carry. They stuffed pockets with jewels. They wrapped themselves in imperial silk robes. They destroyed thousand-year-old books and scrolls. For 3 days, soldiers looted the palace. Over 1 million artifacts disappeared. Some estimate 1.5 million. Today, those treasures are scattered across 47 museums worldwide. The British Museum, the Louvre, museums in New York, Tokyo, Paris, London. Auction houses still occasionally sell summer palace loot. But Lord Elgin wasn't finished. Looting wasn't enough punishment. October 18th, 1860. Lord Elgin ordered the complete destruction of the old summer palace. He wanted to send a message. Quote, "This is a solemn act of retribution," Elgin said, "in which no blood will be spilled, but an emperor's pride, as well as his feelings, will be crushed." Unquote. He considered burning the Forbidden City in central Beijing, but decided that would punish innocent civilians. Yuanmingyuan was the emperor's personal property. Destroying it would hurt him specifically. 4,000 British soldiers spread across the palace complex. They set fires systematically, building by building, hall by hall. The blaze was so massive it was visible from Beijing 40 miles away. Smoke blotted out the sun. It took 3 days to burn everything. 3 days to destroy what took over a century to build. The French refused to participate in the burning. French Ambassador Baron Gros called it unnecessary and dangerous revenge. French generals opposed it publicly, but the British burned it anyway. Victor Hugo, the famous French writer, condemned it years later. He wrote that 2 bandits, France and England, had destroyed a wonder of the world. That while Europeans pretended civilization, they committed barbarism in China. His words were ignored. The old summer palace burned completely. All that remained were a few stone columns from the European-style buildings. Those ruins stand today exactly as they were left in 1860. October 24th, 1860. Prince Gong signed the Convention of Beijing. The treaty ratified everything from the Treaty of Tianjin, plus additional concessions. Britain got the Kowloon Peninsula north of Hong Kong Island. Russia got territory in Outer Manchuria. France got expanded missionary rights. China paid Britain 8 million silver taels in additional indemnities. France got 6 million. For their trouble. For their invasion. For their destruction. The opium trade was now completely legal and protected by international treaty. British and French diplomats set up permanent embassies in Beijing. Foreigners could travel, trade, and evangelize anywhere in China without restriction. The Second Opium War cost over 2,300 British and French lives. China lost approximately 30,000 killed or wounded, But the casualty numbers don't capture the psychological impact. The burning of Yuanmingyuan became a symbol of humiliation, of powerlessness, of China's inability to defend itself against Western imperialism. It was the traumatic moment that defined China's relationship with the West for the next century. The Chinese call it the beginning of the century of humiliation. From the First Opium War in 1839 to the founding of the People's Republic in 1949, 110 years of defeat, exploitation, unequal treaties, and foreign occupation. And they have not forgotten a single day of it. October 18th, 2026. We're back where we started. The tourists at Yuanmingyuan aren't just looking at old ruins. They're participating in a ritual of national memory. Every Chinese schoolchild visits these ruins. Every history textbook explains what happened here. Every October 18th, memorial ceremonies remind China why these stones were never rebuilt. 2023. President Xi Jinping signed the Patriotic Education Law. The law mandates teaching the Century of Humiliation in all Chinese schools, museums, public memorials, online platforms, cultural industries. It's now official state policy to remember the Opium Wars, the unequal treaties, the foreign invasions. The law explicitly identifies these historical humiliations as instructional themes to build national cohesion, strengthen historical awareness, and reinforce loyalty to the Communist Party. The Opium Wars aren't ancient history. They're current political education. China's government maintains Yuanmingyuan as ruins deliberately. They could rebuild it. They have the money. They have the architectural plans. But rebuilding would mean moving on. And moving on would mean forgetting. And forgetting would mean it could happen again. The never forget national humiliation signs aren't subtle. They're direct. China is telling itself and the world that weakness invites destruction, that foreign powers cannot be trusted, that China must be strong enough to prevent another century of humiliation. This shapes everything. China's military buildup, their assertiveness in the South China Sea, their refusal to accept Western lectures on human rights or democracy, their determination to become technologically self-sufficient, their Belt and Road Initiative to build influence globally. When Western nations criticize China, Chinese officials invoke history. When Britain commented on Hong Kong's protests, China's ambassador accused them of having a colonial mindset. When discussions arise about sovereignty and territorial integrity, China mentions how imperialist powers once carved up China like a melon. The Opium Wars ended 165 years ago. But in China's political consciousness, they never ended. The humiliation is kept alive intentionally, used as motivation, as warning, as justification for policies that ensure China will never be weak again. 13.5 million opium addicts, 2 military defeats, over 1 million artifacts looted. The old summer palace burned to ashes. Hong Kong occupied for 156 years. 110 years of foreign domination. Britain nearly destroyed China with opium. China has spent the last 75 years making absolutely certain it never happens again. The ruins of Yuanmingyuan stand as proof, as reminder, as warning. Never forget national humiliation.